Hello, these are 10 games that I would love to see as a crossover with Final Fantasy XIV in the future. I've taken out any inhibitions of something working simply based on lore or anything like that, threw that out the window, and just gone with games that I would genuinely love to see have something to do with Final Fantasy XIV as a crossover in the future, and I think could kind of work. So in no particular order, here are 10 games I think would be fantastic crossovers for Final Fantasy XIV. The first of which is Stella Blade. Stella Blade is an amazing action combat game, obviously developed by Shift Up on the Sony PlayStation. This is something I really hope gets to come to the PC at some point in the future. Recently we saw that there was an announcement. It was a 1-minute sort of update clip at a Tokyo Game Show. Halfway through that, we got news that there's actually a Nier collaboration for Stella Blade itself, where Nier Automata characters, including 2B and Pod, should be either skins or playable content. Maybe there's a storyline to do with that in Stella Blade. I know Yoko Taro is basically on a mission to have as much of his content put into as many games as possible, and bless that man, honestly, we need more Nier content in all games. But it would be really cool if it was the other way around as well, if Square Enix could partner with Stella Blade and we could get Stella Blade stuff. Having some of Eve's outfits in Final Fantasy XIV would be mind-blowing, and that's one of the top reasons I think it would be cool. They could even do a little side quest where you help off fight against the natives, the monsters, and I just think that it would work both ways with Final Fantasy characters being taken into Stella Blade and vice versa. I like the way that Monster Hunter did its crossover, where we basically got essentially 2 crossovers for one, but at the very least, having Eve in our world wouldn't be too far of a stretch of the imagination and would be a great opportunity for some amazing glamour. Next up, true to my heart, is the Mana series. Recently, the Mana series of games by Square Enix saw Visions of Mana, one of my favorite games and probably my game of the year at this point. If the rest of the year continues the way it currently is, I would love to see some kind of mana representation in Final Fantasy XIV. There have been slight references to Secret of Mana in one of the dungeons in particular. You might remember these particular birdies flapping off into the distance. The flamingos are obviously, with this tree in the background, a reference to Secret of Mana, and I was super happy then. It was a nice arc back to how things used to be, and it would be so cool to see any of the characters from a Mana series, which was originally a spin-off from the Final Fantasy series anyway. It would just be really cool, and my hopes for one day seeing something else, something more from the Mana series is definitely up there. Be that just character iterations, having like just a series of things, having a rabbi as a minion, for example, having Flammy as a mount. That would be high on my priority list for certain. Next up, a bit of a wild card. I thought this was a weird one, but also something that would possibly work and would work for newer audiences. Lethal Company is a game that I play probably a little bit too much with my friends in downtime. It's a sort of repeated get loot, sell loot, until you can't make the quota and then die as a result of it. But the bit in between is quite fun. You're basically grabbing a shovel, going around, trying to protect yourself from various monsters inside a laboratory, sort of labyrinth-style instanced areas that are randomized each time, procedurally generated with seeds, and then you get loot and try to survive, and you get an entire day to do that and get back to the ship in time. It is very fun, very repetitive, and I think it would be a really cool crossover. I'm not sure how it could work. Maybe some of the monsters could come into Final Fantasy XIV. I definitely would just love the outfits and a shovel as a weapon. I think it would be a nice comedy crossover, not necessarily a fully fledged storyline. I just think it would be a cool thing. And Lethal Company itself is not afraid of doing crossovers. You might have seen Fortnite, a game I don't have any interest in personally, recently did a Lethal Company crossover. So I don't know, maybe a dance emote in Final Fantasy XIV. Again, I might be completely missing the mark here, but if you're like me, this would probably bring a smile to your face if you did see this one day. Next up, very high on everyone's list, is Monster Hunter Wilds, just as a game to play in general in February next year, but also just the crossover was fantastic with Monster Hunter World, with Final Fantasy XIV. Obviously, they got Behemoth in their world, which was an incredibly fun, if not incredibly difficult fight to learn on their side. And on our side of a crossover, we got a fantastic opportunity to fight against Rathalos. We got some glamour out of it. We got a Palico minion. It was a good time. Yoshi P has mentioned before that they still have interest in working alongside Capcom in the future. And of course, from the other side as well, they would love to do more with Final Fantasy. And I think it was probably one of the most successful crossover events in any game I've ever seen. It was just good because it not only rewarded items, but also gave you a different form of challenge. They created something completely different for Final Fantasy XIV, new content, basically a 4-player extreme. It was the first of its kind with limited healing mechanics. It was just a lot of fun as a one-off, and I think it would be cool to see other monsters come over. I don't know what they could do, maybe the next flagship monster of Wilds or something, but I would hope that it would be a two-way crossover again if they did that. It's very high on my requests because the last one was so good. Next up, I think everybody is going to scold me if I don't mention Final Fantasy VII's remakes. Obviously, we're running up towards the third and final entry for the remake series. We still don't have a title name for that. Rebirth came out. It was a pretty damn good game. A lot of people, including myself, streamed that, and we had a lot of fun. They changed a lot about the original Final Fantasy VII storyline, some for better, some for worse. But at the end of the day, I think most people can agree it was just a very good game. It felt good. The content on offer was a lot better than the first iteration, as in the remake, just called Remake. Rebirth offered a lot, and I think it would be a crime not to have a Final Fantasy VII Remake series crossover whilst it is relevant. Hopefully this is something they can consider and would drive up potential cross-play between the games. And obviously we've seen with Final Fantasy 15, when there was a crossover with 14, a lot of people who hadn't played 15 went and played Final Fantasy 15 just so they could see a Mikote in that world and fight against Garuda, right, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it could work. It could definitely give some great rewards. Think of all of the outfits we could have. Having Aerith's outfit, Tifa's outfit, that sort of stuff. It would just be cool to see those characters in our world somehow. Some kind of, like, I don't know, experiment that Shinra's done. Something that folds space and time. If you've played, I don't want to spoil anything of Rebirth, but there is timey-wimey, space travel-y type stuff going on with dimension travel. Maybe that's something that could equal, oh, I'm accidentally in Final Fantasy XIV, similar to how we go to other shards in our storyline. So that's easily possible, very easy to mix into the lore, and you could make it quite a fun little venture. And it's something, even if it was just the OG Final Fantasy VII, a lot of people would love to see more. And that goes for all of the Final Fantasy games, all of the old ones. My favorite being 8. We got some love with Eden, but I would love to see more from that as well. But yeah, honestly, more older Final Fantasy games or the redos, it would be cool to see them on the screen next to my character in 14. Chrono Trigger. Do I need to explain this one? Chrono Trigger is a fantastic opportunity to maybe for Square Enix to remake this masterpiece and put it, or remaster it and put it on as many platforms as possible. It needs that attention. I personally would love to see Chrono Trigger get the 2.5D HD remakes sort of thing, like Octopath Traveler and all that kind of thing, the Black Label games from Square Enix. I would love to see a remake of that, but it would be cool to see Chrono Trigger, have references brought into 14, have more things, maybe outfits, maybe a storyline. I love Chrono Trigger. I think a lot of people who played that game would love to see more of it. It might be a little bit of a niche interest now as things are progressing, and a lot of us that played the original are probably getting a little bit older, and we're probably not the target audience anymore, but it would just be a nostalgia trip. And I think that applies to any of the 90s RPGs, honestly, from Squaresoft. Just more love for the past would be great. be that the need for a remake or remaster, which I'm hoping one day that Chrono Trigger gets, but just references, just some love towards the past. And in theory, they do have the rights already to this, so it wouldn't be too much of a stretch. I'm not sure how much of a discussion would need to be made, but Chrono Trigger would be a fantastic opportunity for a great crossover. Next up, I've got a bit of a wild card because I decided to sort of refresh my history. I started on World of Warcraft many years ago, and that was my first MMO experience, actually, because I could never get Final Fantasy XI, to work at the time, and before then we were on dial-up connection. My parents wouldn't let me play 11. So when I did eventually get onto PC gaming, the first MMO I played was World of Warcraft. And I think it's a game that currently is making a bit of a resurgence. They've definitely listened to some player feedback. I'm not sure how well it's going. I have not played any content in World of Warcraft for a very long time, but I do know that the storyline is something that could mesh with different timelines, travel between places. I don't know how it would work, but I think it would be one of the most incredible crossovers that Final Fantasy XIV could ever do. The two biggest MMOs on the planet, World of Warcraft and 14, together as some form of crossover. I think that would take the world by storm. Think about the cross-pollination of players that already exists, right? A lot of people, you've seen these people migrate from one game to another and vice versa. It's something that a lot of us have played in 14, and a lot of us might want to, have some form of crossover event, be that glamour. There are so many things from World of Warcraft I could mention. Story-wise, it makes sense because of time travel isn't against, the ideals of that game. Traveling to different worlds, recalibrate the Dark Portal and have us suddenly in Eorzea. I don't know. Have something strange like an orc invasion. I don't know what it would be, but it could be cool. In terms of navigating that, like as a minefield, in terms of collaborative effort, I have no idea how hard that would actually be. But speaking of, there is also Diablo, right? So that's the other Blizzard game that I would probably put in this place. So Diablo 4 is obviously getting its new expansion this October, and a lot of people who play Diablo, I loved the original Diablo 2 and 3. Those were my games, 3 especially. 4 didn't live up necessarily to my expectations, but I would love nothing more than to see Diablo crossover, and so it would seem would Yoshi P. During an interview that I saw and a press conference, one of the collaborations that Yoshi P mentioned that would be high on his list would be a crossover with Diablo. So I don't know how good the talking terms are with Blizzard Entertainment, but considering what that would actually do and how they could do it, it was a bit of a surprise for me to hear Yoshi P mention that as well. But the idea that we could have demons invading Eorzea and vice versa, there could be some great opportunities there. Diablo, very typically gritty, dark, full of gore and blood. Obviously that would probably have to be toned down a bit. I don't know how they would do it in our game with the rating differences, but think about the possibilities that we could have. We could have literally Diablo as a boss fight, as a trial or something. That would be amazing. The Lord of Inferno versus, 7 of your friends and you. So that could be a great opportunity in terms of glamour opportunities, some more gritty designs for armor sets. The typical sort of old school Blizzard Entertainment vibes could run through that. And I don't think many people would turn away from that. They'd be pretty excited. So that's up there on my list for sure. Another game that's probably impossible to ever have crossovers with, but when I was a kid, one of my favorite PlayStation games was Metal Gear Solid. And the Metal Gear series, originally with Hideo Kojima, was some of my favorite gameplay ever. Like, I love every minute of those games. I go back constantly to play those old consoles. I pick up, Metal Gear Solid 2 or walk around as Raiden, loving every minute of it. There's also the Metal Gear Solid Delta, which is a remake of Snake Eater that's coming out, obviously without Kojima, sadly. But it is coming out. It's a remake of that. It looks pretty cool from what we saw at Tokyo Game Show, and it would be a great opportunity to, have that kind of crossover. I know that they've done a Monster Hunter crossover with Portable Ops before, which was a Metal Gear game on, I believe, the PSP, right? The fact is that they had Rathalos versus Snake, which is just crazy if you think about it. So I don't know how close-knit the communities are, like the design teams, the developers in Japan with the Metal Gear Solid, with Konami, that kind of thing. But it would be so cool somehow to have that kind of boundary break and crossover. And it wouldn't be too weird. Obviously, Machinists would get probably a Patriot as a gun. That would be pretty amazing. I don't know. Just the camouflage outfits, the bandana, just the idea of having Metal Gear as a boss fight in Final Fantasy XIV just gives me all kinds of good shivers in the right places. I would love to see that. I don't know how they would do it, if it would even ever be possible, but I don't know. Like I say, this is my list, and it's one of my favorite game series of all time, so, it has to be on there. And then finally, I think something that is very easily accessible and something that's a crying shame that hasn't happened, Octopath Traveler. The Octopath Traveler games, there's 2 of them that you can play. There's some mobile games as well, but, sequentially it is Octopath Traveler 1 and 2. They are fantastic games. Square Enix worked very hard to make a game, in my opinion, that's as close to a re-image of what Final Fantasy could be like in a modern era. I love the HD 2D, the 2.5D graphical style. I love the gameplay, the turn-based stuff. It's such an opportunity for them to do a crossover for that game series, and there's a lot of just great things you could take from Octopath, be that storyline elements, monsters, even mechanically how it works. In my mind, how cool it would be is if they had a piece of content that was turn-based in Final Fantasy XIV, just for a duty. Similar to how they had Monster Hunter, where you had Rathalos, you had the limited flask healing limitations, you had the bosses, you had specific things you had to do, like carving off a tail. They made a specific set of mechanics for that fight. So how hard would it be to create some kind of turn-based sort of Final Fantasy XIV fight? I don't know. That could be quite enjoyable. It could be quite a fun direction. And I know Square Enix is not afraid of, trying new things out. Otherwise, we wouldn't have ended up with the Monster Hunter collab in the first place. And this is obviously much closer to home, sort of nearly in-house at Square Enix. So it would be a great crossover. But anyway, those are my 10. They're in no particular order. Those are games that I love, but I thought I'd include games I've loved over the past, some of which I continue to love even now, and some of which I wish would get remakes or remasters, because quite honestly, the ways to play a lot of the older games, especially Chrono Trigger, is getting harder and harder, especially since emulation is a bad word, and, keeping consoles alive from the 90s in modern eras is getting difficult and harder to replace parts. So that's why remasters are probably the direction I would want to see a lot of those games go against remakes. But remakes are fine as well if they're done authentically. But it would be cool to see some crossovers and then some announcements to go with new game launches. I think that would be a great opportunity to drive players to go and try out other games as well. Anyway, what are your top 10? What games would you love to see, no matter how ridiculous it might sound on paper? What could work, and what would you love to see? Some of your favorite games. Let me know in the comment section. I'm dying to know, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.